He believed the world was his. From the moment the camera pans across the sprawling skyline to the glass walls of the city's most exclusive hotel, we are shown the life of a man who thinks nothing is beyond his reach. In a penthouse suite perched high above the city lights, Thomas Whitfield, mid-40s, sharply dressed in a tailored white shirt and gold cufflinks, surveys his domain with a glass of champagne in hand. Every detail around him screams excess. Fresh orchids delivered that morning, a Rolex watch gleaming on the bedside table, and a view of the skyline that most people would never afford to see. He's not just a guest here. He acts as though the entire floor belongs to him. Thomas moves with slow, deliberate confidence. He places his glass down, straightens his shirt, and checks his reflection in the mirror. He smiles, not out of warmth, but out of certainty. Tonight, he thinks, will be perfect. This is how he sees himself. Untouchable, superior, a man for whom life is a series of transactions that always end in his favor. He doesn't just expect special treatment, he demands it. Now, let me ask you something. When you see someone like this, the kind of person who believes money can buy anything, what do you feel? Do you admire the confidence, or do you feel the arrogance? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The phone rings. Thomas answers smoothly, his tone dripping with entitlement. Yes, this is Mr. Whitfield. The suite is ready? Excellent. And dinner. Make sure it's brought up hot, not lukewarm like last time. He hangs up without a thank you. Gratitude, in his world, is unnecessary. Service to him isn't kindness, it's his right. He wanders the room, taking in the silk sheets, the polished marble bathroom, the decanter of whiskey waiting for him. But there's something missing. Tonight isn't about solitude, it's about indulgence. He wants company, but not just any company. As he scrolls through his phone, his smirk widens. He knows exactly what he wants, and he knows exactly how to get it. Before we go further, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because this story, trust me, is about to take a turn you won't expect. Thomas picks up the phone again, dialing a number he knows by heart. His voice, when he speaks, is cold, businesslike. Yes, it's me. I'll need someone tonight. And listen carefully. Only send me a white girl. Do you understand? I don't want mistakes. His words hang heavy in the air, dripping with prejudice, laced with superiority. He doesn't even flinch as he says them. To him, it's just another preference, no more unusual than ordering steak instead of chicken. But you and I know better. That single demand, that single sentence, will be the first stone in the avalanche that will bury him. He leans back into the leather chair, satisfied, convinced the evening will go exactly as he planned. He raises his glass once more and whispers to himself, I always get what I want. The stage is set. The man, his arrogance, and his blind confidence in a world he thinks he controls. What he doesn't realize is that life has a way of flipping the script. And tonight, the script is already changing. The phone call wasn't casual. It was a performance. Thomas reclined in his leather armchair, crossing one leg over the other, a glass of champagne balanced in his hand, as though he were conducting an interview rather than making a request. He didn't say, hello. He barked his name like an order. This is Whitfield. I need company tonight. On the other end of the line, a polite voice responded, professional and soft. Of course, Mr. Whitfield. We'll be happy to arrange that for you. Do you have any preferences? His smirk deepened. Preferences. That word was too small for what he demanded. Yes, Thomas said, his tone cool and sharp. Make sure she's white. I don't want mistakes this time. Do you understand me? I don't care who else is available. I expect exactly what I asked for. He swirled the champagne in his glass, watching the golden bubbles rise as if the world itself existed only to serve his whims. The voice on the other end hesitated, then replied carefully, Understood. We'll confirm the details and send someone promptly. Thomas chuckled, leaning back. Good, and make it quick. I don't like waiting. Time, after all, is money, and in both I have more than enough." He ended the call without another word. No thank you, no courtesy. To him, politeness was for those who needed favours. He didn't need anyone. Or so he thought. Pause for a second. Let me ask you, how do you feel when you hear a man speak this way? Confident? Disgusted? Would you tolerate such arrogance if you were on the other end of that phone call? Drop your reaction in the comments. I want to know. Thomas stood, pacing the suite as if preparing for a grand evening. He adjusted his cufflinks, glanced at his reflection, and gave himself a satisfied nod. Perfection, he murmured. But beneath that carefully ironed shirt and polished smile was something uglier. Not just arrogance, but a conviction that people were objects, items on a menu, to be selected or discarded based on his taste. He poured himself another drink and sat at the edge of the bed, tapping his fingers against the glass table. "She'd better not mess this up," he muttered. "Last time, they tried sending me someone. Different. Unacceptable. When I pay, I expect control." Every word oozed entitlement, a man who thought life was a contract signed in his favour. Outside the hotel window, the city lights flickered like distant stars, indifferent to the man who believed he owned the night. But life, as it so often does, was already writing a different ending. In just a few minutes, there would be a knock at his door. And Thomas Whitfield, so smug, so certain, would begin a descent he could never have imagined. The suite was quiet, filled only with the faint hum of the air conditioner and the soft fizz of champagne as Thomas poured yet another glass. He checked his watch. 10 minutes past the call. His lips tightened. Waiting was not something he tolerated well. "Ridiculous," he muttered, pacing across the polished marble floor. "I pay for efficiency, not delay." Then came the sound that cut through his irritation. 3 sharp knocks at the door. Thomas's smirk returned instantly. Finally! He strode across the room with the confidence of a man expecting the world to bow to him. Without hesitation, he pulled the door open, ready to greet what he believed would be his flawless evening. But what stood on the other side wasn't what he had pictured. A young black woman, perhaps in her early 30s, stood in the hallway. Her skin glowed with warmth, her posture calm, yet dignified. She wore a simple, elegant dress, not flashy, but tasteful. The kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but commanded respect. In her hands, she carried a small leather folder, as if she had just come from a professional engagement. For a split second, Thomas's brow furrowed in confusion. Then it hardened into contempt. He leaned against the doorframe, eyes scanning her from head to toe, his smirk curling into something cruel. "You've got to be kidding me," he sneered. "This is what they sent me?" The woman blinked, caught slightly off guard, but her voice was steady. "Excuse me?" Thomas scoffed, his laugh sharp and cutting. "Don't play dumb. You're early, and you're clearly in the wrong place. This," he gestured into the opulent suite behind him, "isn't for you." She straightened, her expression calm but guarded, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. "I think you're mistaken." But Thomas wasn't listening. His words came like venom, each syllable dripping with disdain. "You're not my type. You're not my level. In fact, you're not even supposed to be here." The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. Now pause for a moment. Imagine you're this woman, knocked on the wrong door, only to be met with cruelty, with arrogance sharpened into racism. What would you do? Walk away? Confront him? Let me know in the comments, because this is the moment where everything begins to shift. The woman took a breath, her voice even but cool. "I believe you've misunderstood the situation. I'm not who you think I am." But Thomas only waved her off, arrogance flashing like a neon sign. "Doesn't matter who you are. This suite, this evening, it's above your pay grade. Go knock somewhere else." Her lips tightened, but she didn't reply. She simply met his gaze, steady, unflinching. For a brief moment, Thomas felt something unfamiliar, unease. But he shook it off quickly, stepping back as though to slam the door. "Wrong place, sweetheart," he muttered. "You don't belong here." With that, he pushed the door shut, sealing her out as though she were nothing more than an inconvenience. What he didn't realize was that this single act, this cruel dismissal, was the first domino in a chain that would bring his entire world crashing down. The door had nearly closed, but not quite. The woman's hand, steady and composed, pressed lightly against it, preventing it from slamming in her face. Her voice was quiet, polite. "Sir, I'm here for the conference, I believe." But Thomas cut her off with a sharp, mocking laugh. He yanked the door open again, leaning against it with theatrical disdain. "Conference? Please, don't waste my time with lies. You think you can just stroll into the most exclusive suite in this hotel and convince me you belong here? Try again." His words sliced through the air, harsh and demeaning. The woman remained still, her face unreadable, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of irritation. Thomas, emboldened by her silence, pressed on. He stepped closer, towering over her, his smirk widening. "Let me guess. They sent you by mistake. A little scheduling error, perhaps?" I said, white, crystal clear. "And what do I get?" "You." He dragged out the last word like it was poison on his tongue. The woman took a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling with measured calm. "I think you've confused me with someone else," she said firmly, her tone edged with dignity. But Thomas wasn't done. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a sneer. "No confusion here. You're not my type. You're not even in the same universe as my type. You don't belong in a place like this. Not in this hotel, not in this suite, not anywhere near me." Her eyes flashed, but she didn't rise to his bait. Instead, she met his gaze directly. "The way you're speaking says more about you than it does about me." For a split second, Thomas faltered, taken aback by her composure. But pride surged through him, refusing to allow weakness. He barked a laugh, shaking his head. "Oh, that's rich. You think you can lecture me? I'm Thomas Whitfield. I don't get told off, especially not by someone who doesn't even belong here. Now, let me ask you, if you were standing there in her shoes, facing this storm of insults, what would you do? Would you fire back? Or would you walk away with your head held high? Comment below, because this is where the story forces us to think about dignity in the face of cruelty." Thomas stepped back and gestured toward the hallway with a dramatic flourish. "Go on, sweetheart. Find the right floor, the right client, the right... whatever you are. Because here, you're out of place, out of league, out of luck." His voice was sharp, triumphant, as though he had won some imaginary battle. He relished the sound of his own cruelty, convinced that belittling her reaffirmed his superiority. The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. Her jaw tightened, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of anger. Instead, she offered him a single look, one that cut deeper than words ever could. It was a look of recognition, a look that said, "I see exactly what you are." Without a word, she turned. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she walked away, her back straight, her dignity intact. Thomas watched her go, shaking his head with a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. Wrong place, wrong time, and definitely the wrong woman. He closed the door with finality, proud of himself, utterly unaware that he had just written the first chapter of his downfall. Thomas stood at the door for a moment after she turned away, his smirk hardening into something sharper. The echo of her words, "It says more about you than it does about me," lingered in his ears like an insult. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone he had already decided was beneath him. Without thinking, he stepped back into the hallway. "Hey," he called out, his voice ringing through the quiet corridor. The woman stopped. Slowly, she turned her head, her expression steady, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of weary frustration. Thomas strode toward her, his polished shoes striking the marble floor with heavy certainty. "Don't walk away while I'm talking to you. That's not how this works." She raised an eyebrow, saying nothing, waiting. He laughed, but it wasn't light-hearted. It was cutting, cruel. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know how much money I spent on this suite? On this hotel? People like you don't get to decide when the conversation is over. I decide. Always. The woman held her ground. Money doesn't buy respect, she said quietly. His face twisted with contempt. Respect? Please. I don't need yours. I don't need anyone's. What I need, what I demand, is choice. And tonight, I chose. You're not it. You're not even close. You're an error. A mistake. He stepped closer, lowering his voice but raising its venom. You are not my type. You're not my standard. And you will never be my equal. Do you understand me? Never. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the effort of restraint. She inhaled sharply through her nose, exhaled slowly, and said nothing. That silence enraged him more than any insult could have. He needed dominance, and her refusal to react denied him that satisfaction. Unbelievable, he muttered, his voice rising. I pay for perfection, and this is what shows up at my door? Trash. A glitch in the system. They should be embarrassed for even letting you set foot in this hallway. Pause with me here. If you were in that hallway, watching this unfold, a man dripping with wealth, screaming down his nose at someone who has done nothing but stand with dignity, what would you do? Would you step in? Would you record it? Or would you stay silent? Tell me in the comments, because moments like this test not just the victim, but everyone who witnesses. The woman finally spoke, her voice low, calm, but steady as stone. You've said enough. And with that, she turned once more, her heels clicking firmly as she walked away. Thomas shouted after her, his voice echoing off the walls. That's right, walk away, because that's all you can do. You don't belong here. Not in this hotel, not in this world. People like me. We choose who gets in, and you're not it. But his words no longer reached her. She didn't look back. She didn't falter. She simply disappeared around the corner, leaving him standing there, breathing heavily, flushed with the satisfaction of his own cruelty. He straightened his jacket, shaking his head as if he had been inconvenienced. Pathetic, he muttered. A waste of time. With that, he returned to his suite, poured himself another glass of champagne, and sat back on the bed. He told himself he had won, that his dominance had been reaffirmed. What he didn't realize was that his words had already sown the seeds of his destruction. Every insult, every sneer, every ounce of arrogance was a brick in the wall that would soon collapse on top of him. Thomas settled back into his suite, his chest still rising and falling from the adrenaline of his outburst. He poured himself another drink, the champagne fizzing over the rim as he muttered, Unbelievable. Some people really don't know their place. He replayed the scene in his mind, embellishing it already, twisting it until he was the hero of his own story, the man who set someone straight. To him, cruelty wasn't cruelty. It was proof of power. Just as he sank deeper into the leather chair, another knock rattled the door. This time, he smirked. Finally, the right one. He opened the door to find exactly what he had expected the first time. A tall, elegant white woman in her late 20s, dressed in a fitted cocktail dress, her smile polished and professional. She carried herself with the air of someone who knew how to play the role she'd been hired for. Thomas stepped aside with a grand sweep of his arm. Now this is more like it. Come in, darling. The woman entered gracefully, setting her clutch on the table as Thomas poured her a drink. He couldn't resist bragging almost immediately. You wouldn't believe what just happened, he said, handing her the glass. They tried sending me the wrong girl. Total disaster. Not my type, not my league. I had to put her in her place. He chuckled, sipping his champagne. You should have seen her face when I told her she didn't belong here. Priceless. The escort smiled politely, though her eyes flickered with unease. She had heard men boast before, but there was something especially ugly in the way he relished the humiliation. Still, she said nothing. It wasn't her role to challenge him. Thomas leaned back, stretching his arms across the back of the couch, basking in his own story. That's the problem these days. People thinking they can just walk into places they don't deserve. But not me. I draw the line. I always get what I want. He raised his glass in a mock toast to himself, his grin wide and smug. Pause for a second. If you were in her shoes, listening to this man brag about tearing someone down, laughing at their dignity, how would you react? Would you call him out, stay silent, or walk away? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because moments like this say as much about us as they do about him. The evening went on much as Thomas had imagined it would. Soft music played from the suite's hidden speakers, the champagne flowed, and he entertained himself with stories of his success, his wealth, his power. But beneath the surface of his laughter and arrogance, the earlier encounter hung in the air like smoke. He didn't know it yet, but his cruel words had already set off a chain reaction. Because tomorrow night, at the very same hotel, surrounded by colleagues and partners, he would see that woman again. And this time, the balance of power would flip. For now, though, Thomas Whitfield sat back, smug and satisfied, believing he had conquered yet another evening. He couldn't have been more wrong. The next evening, the hotel's grand ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers. Waiters in white gloves glided between tables, serving champagne and hors d'oeuvres to men and women dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns. This was the kind of event Thomas lived for, a place where wealth and ego mingled as easily as the sparkling wine. Thomas entered like a man arriving at his coronation. He wore a dark-tailored suit, silk tie, and a smug smile that seemed to stretch wider with every handshake. Business partners slapped him on the back, offering greetings, and he soaked in the attention as though the night had been planned in his honor. He gathered with a cluster of colleagues near the bar, already halfway through his first glass. The conversation quickly turned from deals and markets to stories, and Thomas couldn't resist. "You won't believe what happened to me last night," he began, his voice loud enough to carry over the music. "They tried to send me the wrong girl. Can you imagine? I said very clearly what I wanted, and this mistake shows up at my door." Laughter rippled through the group, fueled by champagne and the ease of shared arrogance. Thomas leaned in closer, smirking. "I told her right to her face. She didn't belong. I practically had to throw her out myself. The look on her face, worth every cent. Some people just need to be reminded where they stand." The men around him chuckled, shaking their heads, while one of the women raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Thomas took their silence for approval and pressed on, mimicking the scene with exaggerated gestures, her standing at the door, his dismissive wave the moment he shut the door in her face. He laughed at his own performance, basking in the spotlight. Now pause here. Imagine you're at this party, holding a glass of champagne, watching this man boast about humiliating someone. Would you laugh along? Would you challenge him? Or would you quietly step away? Tell me in the comments, because these moments reveal what kind of person each of us chooses to be. Thomas clinked glasses with one of his partners, his voice rising again. That's the problem these days. People thinking they can walk into places they don't deserve. But not on my watch, not in my world. The group laughed once more, though the laughter was thinner this time, less natural. A few exchanged glances, uneasy but unwilling to confront him. Thomas didn't notice. He never did. His ego shielded him from subtle cues, from discomfort, from the quiet ripple of judgment beginning to spread through the room. He was too busy telling his story again, louder, to anyone who would listen. The chandeliers glittered above, the music swelled, and Thomas Whitfield laughed louder than anyone, convinced the night belonged to him. But the night was only just beginning. And soon, the woman he had mocked so cruelly would step into this same ballroom, and the laughter would die in his throat. The ballroom buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses as Thomas finished his story for the third time, milking it for every chuckle he could squeeze from the men gathered around him. He was red-cheeked from champagne, his grin wide, his gestures grand. "And I told her," he said, mimicking his dismissive wave again, "you don't belong here. And you should have seen her face. Priceless." The group chuckled half-heartedly, though a few of them glanced at one another, uncomfortable. Still, no one challenged him. Thomas smirked, satisfied. To him, silence always meant approval. Then the music shifted. The soft strings faded, replaced by the elegant announcement of the master of ceremonies. His voice carried across the ballroom, commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's distinguished guest, the daughter of the United States Attorney General, here to attend tomorrow's keynote conference." The crowd turned toward the entrance. Applause began to ripple across the room. And then she stepped in, the woman from the hallway. She entered gracefully, wearing a sleek black evening gown that shimmered under the chandeliers. Her hair was swept elegantly back, her posture regal, her expression calm but commanding. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly who she was, and who didn't need to prove it to anyone. Thomas froze. His glass slipped slightly in his hand, nearly spilling. His smile vanished, replaced by a stunned, pale expression. It couldn't be, but it was. The woman he had mocked, belittled, and dismissed as not his type, as a mistake, as not belonging, now stood before the entire ballroom, introduced with honor, greeted with applause. His colleagues followed his gaze, confusion flickering across their faces as they noticed his reaction. One of them muttered under his breath, "Isn't that—" The applause swelled. The Attorney General's daughter acknowledged the room with a graceful nod, smiling softly as she was led further in by the hosts of the event. She didn't look Thomas's way. Not yet. But Thomas felt her presence like a spotlight burning directly onto him. His heart pounded in his chest, his palms slick with sweat. Pause here. Imagine being him in this moment, realizing the person you mocked in private now holds a position of respect, influence, and power in public. What would you feel? Shame? Fear? Denial? Drop your answer in the comments, because this is the kind of twist life throws when arrogance collides with reality. Around the bar, the laughter had stopped completely. The men who had chuckled moments earlier now stared in uneasy silence, piecing together what Thomas had just bragged about. Whispers started to spread like wildfire, carrying fragments of his cruel story through the crowd. "He said what to her? Last night? Are you serious? Oh my God, he didn't." Thomas tried to swallow, his throat suddenly dry. He forced a laugh, raising his glass weakly as if to pretend nothing was wrong. "Well, would you look at that? Small world, huh?" But no one laughed with him. All at once, the power he thought he held slipped from his grasp, and for the first time in years, Thomas Whitfield felt something unfamiliar, something he couldn't buy his way out of. Fear. The ballroom had shifted. What moments ago was filled with laughter and polite applause now carried a different energy. Sharp, buzzing, dangerous. Conversations turned into murmurs, and murmurs turned into whispers, each one carrying the same name. Thomas Whitfield. He could feel it. The eyes on him, the sidelong glances, the way the circle of colleagues around him seemed to widen, giving him space not out of respect, but out of discomfort. One of the men who had laughed at his story just moments earlier now leaned closer to another guest, whispering into his ear. Both pairs of eyes flicked to Thomas, and then quickly away again. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. He adjusted his tie, tried to laugh, tried to break the tension. "Quite the coincidence, isn't it? What are the odds?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying the calm he tried so desperately to project. But no one responded. The woman, the daughter of the Attorney General, had moved further into the ballroom, greeting dignitaries, shaking hands with a grace that outshone every crystal chandelier. She didn't look his way, not even once, but somehow her presence alone held him captive. It was as though the entire room now existed in orbit around her, and he was the outcast, a shadow at the edge of her light. He forced a smile, draining the rest of his champagne in one gulp. "Excuse me," he muttered, to no one in particular, setting the empty glass down too quickly, the sharp clink betraying his nerves. He began moving toward the exit, his polished shoes clicking against the marble, but the whispers followed him. Did you hear what he called her? Last night in his suite. Arrogant, disgusting. Thomas's pace quickened, his once confident stride now stiff, uneven. He tugged at his collar, as if the room had suddenly grown unbearably hot. Every step he took felt heavier, every gaze sharper. He reached the side door, his hand brushing the handle, desperate for escape. But just as he pushed it open, he caught sight of a small group of guests turning to watch him. Their expressions weren't neutral anymore. They were judging, condemning. And then he heard it. The first laugh. Not with him, but at him. Quiet, bitter, mocking. It was enough to stop him in his tracks. Pause here for a moment. If you were in his shoes, would you try to run? Or would you face the whispers head on, even if you knew the truth was against you? Comment below, because Thomas is about to learn what running from shame really feels like. He let the door swing shut, his hand trembling as he pulled it back. He turned, forcing himself to walk calmly into the room again, though every inch of his skin screamed to flee. But the whispers had already taken root. What had been arrogance the night before was now poison, spreading through the very circle that once fed his ego. For the first time, Thomas Whitfield, the man who believed the world bent to his will, felt powerless. And the night was only beginning. The sunlight spilled harshly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Thomas's penthouse suite. He groaned, dragging a hand over his face, his head heavy from too much champagne the night before. He reached for his phone, expecting the usual stream of congratulatory messages and invitations. But the screen glowed with something else entirely. Notification after notification. Hundreds. Then thousands. Confused, he unlocked the screen and froze. Every news app, every feed, every trending headline carried his name. VIP businessman caught in racist scandal. Whitfield humiliates Attorney General's daughter at hotel. Entitled Mogul targets woman in shocking tirade. Accompanied by photos. Not grainy, not speculative. Crystal clear images and videos taken by party guests. Thomas's own face, mid-gesture, mocking, sneering, laughing. Every angle immortalized his arrogance. He sat upright in bed, his pulse quickening. No, this isn't possible. But it was. The comments below each article tore through him like knives. Disgusting. This man should be finished. Money doesn't buy class. How did he think he'd get away with this? And worse still, hashtags with his name attached trended globally, spiraling out of control. Screenshots of his boasts from the party had already spread. The entire internet had become his jury, and the verdict was unanimous. Pause here. What do you think happens when private arrogance collides with public exposure? Could anyone survive that storm? Or does it always end the same way, with reputation in ruins? Tell me in the comments. Thomas stumbled out of bed, pacing the suite. He grabbed the hotel phone, barking at the receptionist. Get me the manager, now. This is slander. I'll sue every paper that printed this filth. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it wasn't slander. It was the truth. Caught on camera, witnessed by dozens. There was no hiding, no twisting the story. The world had seen who he really was. His own assistant finally called, her voice tense. Thomas, we need to talk. This is everywhere. The board is furious. Contracts are already being reviewed. Investors are pulling out. He snapped, handle it. But her silence said everything. Some things couldn't be handled. By the time he hung up, sweat beaded his forehead. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, the polished image of success now cracking, fragile, mocked by the man staring back at him. For the first time in his life, Thomas Whitfield didn't see a king. He saw a man cornered, and the storm outside had only just begun. By the afternoon, Thomas's empire was unraveling. The first email came from a corporate partner overseas. In light of recent events, we must suspend our agreement until further notice. polite words masking a brutal truth. They were cutting ties. Then came another, and another. Contracts worth millions evaporated in hours, evaporated because of words he thought no one would remember, words he thought were harmless when spoken from a penthouse. His phone rang non-stop, not with new deals, but with angry voices. A board member snarled through the speaker. "You've destroyed our reputation, Thomas. Do you have any idea the damage you've caused? Every client is pulling out." He tried to push back. "This is temporary. The media will move on. I'll issue a statement." But the man on the other end cut him off. "This isn't going away. You mocked the Attorney General's daughter in public. Do you understand the gravity of that? Our name is toxic now. Yours most of all." Click. The line went dead. Thomas sat at his desk, his hands trembling as he stared at the empty contracts folder on his laptop. Years of carefully built power were disintegrating, undone not by market crashes or hostile takeovers, but by his own arrogance. Now let me ask you, do you think a single moment of cruelty should be enough to collapse an empire? Or is it only fair when that moment reveals the truth about a man's character? Comment your thoughts, because this is the question that divides reputations from legacies. His secretary knocked gently on the office door, her voice uneasy. "Mr. Whitfield, there's been a wave of resignations. Half the staff is walking out. They don't want their names tied to yours anymore." Thomas slammed his fist on the desk, shouting, "Then let them go. I don't need them." But even as the words left his mouth, he felt the hollow echo of a man shouting into an empty room. The company's stock began to plummet. Screens around his office flashed red, numbers crashing downward. Investors sold off shares at lightning speed, leaving his fortune bleeding out in real time. Colleagues who once toasted him at dinners now deleted his number. Partners who once praised his vision now pretended they never knew him. By the end of the day, Thomas Whitfield's empire, the fortress he believed indestructible, was crumbling into dust. And the worst was still to come. Because when arrogance collides with power, it doesn't just ruin reputations. It invites investigation. By the third day, Thomas's scandal was no longer just gossip. It was law. The Attorney General stepped before the press, flanked by advisors and officials. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and the words landed like thunder. "We are opening a formal inquiry into the business practices of Thomas Whitfield and his companies." The room erupted. Microphones shoved forward, headlines forming in real time. The man Thomas had mocked indirectly, the father of the woman he humiliated, now held the gavel of justice over his empire. Thomas watched from his penthouse, the TV's glow painting his pale face. His glass of whiskey trembled in his hand. This is a witch hunt," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. But denial couldn't shield him from reality. Subpoenas were issued. Investigators raided his offices, seizing boxes of documents, servers, and financial ledgers. Employees streamed out of the building under the camera's gaze, some openly shaking their heads, some whispering to journalists. And the findings began to surface. Tax loopholes, shady deals, payments buried in offshore accounts. Practices Thomas had long considered business as usual were suddenly rebranded as fraud, corruption, and malpractice. He raged in private, pacing his suite like a caged animal. "Everyone does this. Every CEO finds loopholes. Why me? Why now?" But deep down, he knew the answer. Because arrogance doesn't just humiliate, it exposes. His words had turned the spotlight onto him, and once the spotlight burned, it revealed everything. Now, pause for a second. Do you think this is justice? That one cruel act led to his entire empire being torn open? Or do you think the system only cared because of who the woman was? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this question lingers long after the scandal. Board members abandoned him. Friends disappeared. Even his lawyers began to hedge, their voices careful. "Thomas, this is serious. You need to prepare for the worst." He shouted at them, "You work for me!" But the words felt empty, stripped of the authority they once carried. The walls were closing in. Headlines screamed daily updates. Protesters gathered outside his offices, chanting for justice. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the woman he had mocked walked freely, head held high, while Thomas Whitfield drowned in the consequences of his own arrogance. He had once believed he was untouchable. Now every touch came from the hand of justice. And soon, even that would not be the worst of it. It happened faster than he ever imagined. One morning, long before the sun touched the skyline, there was a pounding on the door of his penthouse. Heavy fists against the polished wood, followed by voices shouting his name. "Thomas Whitfield, open up! Federal agents!" His heart froze. He staggered from the couch, still dressed in yesterday's wrinkled suit, a half-empty bottle on the table beside him. For a fleeting moment, he considered ignoring the noise, pretending it wasn't real. But the door shattered under a battering ram, splinters flying across the marble floor. Agents flooded in, shouting commands. "Hands where we can see them!" Thomas's once commanding voice cracked as he stammered, This is a mistake. I can explain." But his wrists were yanked behind his back, cold steel cuffs locking in place. The man who once toasted to his power at glittering parties was now being dragged through his own lobby, barefoot, humiliated under the flash of cameras waiting outside. Reporters shouted his name, microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Whitfield, do you regret your words? Was it worth it? Do you have anything to say to the Attorney General's daughter?" He kept his head down, jaw clenched, sweat dripping. There was no answer that could save him now. By noon, every channel played the footage on repeat. "From penthouse to prison," one headline sneered. Another called it the price of arrogance. Meanwhile, his assets were frozen. Bank accounts locked, luxury cars seized. Even the penthouse he once flaunted was now property of the state. He reached out desperately, to colleagues, to friends, to family. But one by one, the calls went unanswered. His business partners had fled. His so-called friends had deleted his number. Even his own family, embarrassed and exhausted, refused to be seen with him. In the end, Thomas sat alone in a holding cell. The walls were bare, the air thick with the stench of despair. Gone were the crystal chandeliers, the champagne glasses, the sycophantic laughter of admirers. All that remained was silence. He sat hunched on the narrow bench, staring at the cracks in the concrete floor. His mind replayed the moment at the hotel door over and over. The sneer, the words, the arrogance, the look in her eyes as she walked away with dignity. It all seemed so small now. A few minutes of cruelty, yet those minutes had destroyed him. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think Thomas deserved to lose everything for those words? Or do you think his downfall was the inevitable result of a lifetime of arrogance? Share your view in the comments, because this is where morality collides with consequence. As the hours dragged by, Thomas leaned against the wall, his head heavy, his wrists raw from the cuffs. For the first time in his life, Thomas Whitfield had nothing. No power, no wealth, no allies. Only himself. And himself was not enough. The courtroom steps gleamed in the afternoon sun, flanked by rows of cameras and reporters. A wave of photographers leaned forward, shutters clicking in rapid fire as the Attorney General descended the stairs with his daughter at his side. She walked tall, her black suit tailored and elegant, her posture proud but composed. There was no need for her to say anything. Her presence alone told the story. The daughter who had been mocked, dismissed, and humiliated now stood as a symbol of dignity and resilience. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward, but the Attorney General raised his hand, silencing the noise. His words were measured, calm, but they struck with the weight of authority. Justice is not just about crimes committed on paper. It is also about the way we treat one another. Disrespect, prejudice, arrogance, these too have consequences. He did not mention Thomas Whitfield by name. He didn't need to. The cameras zoomed in on his daughter, her expression serene. For a brief moment, her eyes lifted, as though she were remembering that night, the knock on the hotel door, the venomous words, the dismissal. But now, everything had shifted. She was no longer the target of arrogance. She was the emblem of its downfall. And now let me turn to you. What do you take from this story? Would you have walked away like she did? Or would you have fought back in the moment? Comment below, because every viewer carries their own answer, and each answer reflects who we are. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe more stories like this deserve to be heard. Your support keeps these lessons alive. Meanwhile, Thomas Whitfield sat alone in his cell, staring at the blank wall. The echo of the Attorney General's words reached him only through a crackling television. His empire was gone. His name was ash. His future erased. All of it because of one night, one choice, one word too many. The final image lingers. The Attorney General and his daughter stepping into a waiting car, the crowd parting for them, the flash of cameras burning their silhouette into history. And over it all, the narrator's voice delivers the moral. Sometimes, a single word can destroy an entire life. Choose yours wisely. The screen fades, the music swells, and the story ends, not with wealth or arrogance, but with dignity, justice, and the reminder that power without respect is nothing at all.